Let's get to 4 downs right now because we're going to go ahead and call out that college football playoff committee. And there's really little I like doing more than that. Here we go. 4 downs is now, and it's brought to you by our friends at Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and On.
4 downs. 4 questions. 4 answers. The Dave Hooker Show.
4
downs. A presentation of offthehooksports.com.
All righty, here we go. 4 downs. Did the college football playoff get it right? We shall discuss that, and it's brought to you by our friends at Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn. If people want to be associated with the program, all you need to do is, can you tell me what Cooper Mays before we actually get to 4 downs? If I can find the stupid button.
Cooper Mays here. Hit like and subscribe.
There we go. Hit like and subscribe. We greatly appreciate that. The numbers continue to grow. Hit a new mark of 3,500 subscribers. We want to hit 4,000. How about that by the end of the year? So we need you to tell you and your friends. We need you to hit that like and subscribe button. We need you and support our sponsors, Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn. Enjoy life when you see better. Local vision service for LASIK, cataract surgery, and regular eye examination. CCTeyes.com. CCTeyes.com. Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn. Which down is it, Coop?
Coop here. First down.
Thank you. Did the committee get it right? Okay. Did the committee get it right? The old BCS formula would have had Alabama ahead of FSU as well. So did they get it right? Yes or no question. I will ask you that, Caleb Calhoun.
Yes. Yeah. Well, they didn't get it right by their own standards, but they got it right by the standards I think they should apply. And I hate to admit that, but Dave, even if this is going to be the craziest thing I'm going to say all day, even if Florida State had Jordan Travis, I would have had this top 4 over Florida State. Their schedule was ranked number 57 nationally. Alabama was number 5. Texas was number 11. I could look Mike Norvell dead in the eye and say, sorry, coach. 1 loss with Alabama's schedule is more impressive than undefeated with Florida State's schedule. It just is.
Okay, but now let me say this. That's largely not his fault. That's the ACC being the ACC.
And we'll get to that still somewhat being Florida State's fault in a minute. But
okay.
You're right. It is largely not his fault. But we have to factor in schedule strength when we're picking the top 4 teams. We do, right, Dave? We can't just put Liberty in there because they're undefeated.
Completely agree.
And I'm not accusing Florida State of being Liberty, but I am saying, okay, Michigan has the 33rd ranked strength of schedule. 33rd and 5, yes, Alabama is significantly better, but not significant enough where a 1-loss Alabama would be better than an undefeated Michigan. 57 and 5, the 57th ranked strength of schedule and the 5th ranked strength of schedule. I'm sorry, 1 loss versus undefeated, you have to do it. Now, so the committee got it right from my perspective, which I think record and schedule strength and head-to-head should all be factors. Where they got it wrong is they say most deserving and body of work doesn't matter. The committee sits there and says 4 best teams, period, end of story. Well, they're lying to us. Because if they were picking the 4 best teams, Georgia would be in the college football playoff. Who in the world thinks that Georgia would be... If Georgia played Washington right now, Dave, what do you think Vegas would set the line at?
Oh, I would say Georgia 6.5, 7.5.
Oh, I think it'd be Georgia 10.5 to 15 to 12.5. Yeah.
Well, you would know better than me. I'm not a big gambler. I mean, it would be significant, and I would go into the game being stunned if Georgia didn't win.
Yeah, Georgia would be favored over every single team in the playoff, including Alabama. So how can you, even though they just lost to Alabama, you and I both know they'd be favored over Alabama if they played in a rematch. So how can you look at that and say that we're picking the 4 best teams regardless of resume, but leave Georgia out? And also, I'm going to give Ohio State a break. Leave Ohio State out. I would sit there and say Ohio State in Washington. Ohio State would be favored over Washington on a neutral field. Now, that doesn't mean Washington doesn't belong in because they have the resume to get in. But committee, stop lying to us. Stop saying you're only looking at the 4 best teams. You're looking at the teams with the best body of work. Just admit that to us.
Caleb is 100% correct here. I want to get that up on the message board because that doesn't happen often. Yeah, so that's up there. Caleb is 100. That's according to our message board. Caleb is 100% correct here. listen, if Jordan Travis is still healthy, there's no way in creation that Florida State should be left out. The simple fact is, just like Tennessee, and help me with the year, we were standing around a practice, the last practice before the SEC championship. No, it was a Monday practice for the SEC championship game. We got handed out, this 4 emails, I guess, and we got handed out a press release that said John Higgins is not available to play in postseason play. And that was the first year of the rule where you had to pass 6 hours to compete in postseason play. Well, despite those advisors that suggested against it, John Higgins took 4 high-level math classes and did not pass 6 hours worth of it because he wanted to be a teacher and he wanted to keep his degree going. A lot of people don't know this. Tennessee was the 65th team on a 64-team playoff. They did not make the NCAA.
We're talking the men's basketball NCAA
men's basketball,
by the way.
Yes. Men's basketball. They did not make it partly because of John Higgins. Now, they had also stumbled down the stretch, but I was told that Tennessee was the 65th team on the chalkboard. They would have made it had it not been for John Higgins. So the bottom line is, this is a TV show. Jordan Travis not available. You should absolutely factor that in. And I'm sorry for him. I'm sorry for Florida State, but I want to see the best games. And without him, they come limping in and they're not going to advance past the semifinals. That's a factor.
And also last year's TCU game certainly didn't help because they don't want a repeat of that, Georgia TCU in the national championship game. But Dave, I would ask you before we move on, just real quick. So do you think it's a mixture? Do you think they're mixing in best teams plus body of work? I mean, they say they only look at 4 best teams. And the debate is best teams, body of work. You would say Florida State has the body of work, but they're not a good enough team because Jordan Travis gets in. But I think if they're looking truly at best teams, well, Georgia and Ohio State would be in. So I'm guessing what you're saying is it's probably a split the baby moment, right? They're trying to mix in best teams and body of work, use both formulas.
Probably. I would, I think we all need to remember this is a TV show. Okay. And we get serious about it, but this is entertainment. This is a television show. And if you go in there and you have a 40-3 blowout, that doesn't help you. Now, TCU, held its own in the semifinals last year. So I'm not going to diss TCU for what they did. And I do think it'll be a more level playing field moving forward. But the simple fact is Alabama ahead of Florida State makes a lot of sense. I think Alabama and Georgia making the playoff ahead of Florida State makes a lot of sense. But you can't do that because the other teams that were a factor. But Alabama ahead of Florida State, yeah. I mean, that's pretty much where you are. I got no problem with that because of the Jordan Travis injury. I would be up on my high horse if not for the Travis injury, who is Florida State's quarterback. That to me is way different because he's a Heisman Trophy candidate. And if it's a TV show, which it is, by the way, my Heisman vote is in and he wasn't on it. I think that's something that you have to factor in because it's a TV show. It's entertainment.
Cooper Mays here. Second down.
Is there an SEC bias and is it warranted? I say yes and yes. Alabama was going to make that. Greg Sankey joked even before in an interview with Mark Slabaugh that it's not even in a real world to say an SEC team couldn't make it. So Alabama jumps from 8 to the top 4 because there's an SEC bias and it is warranted. Who would be surprised if Alabama won it all? I wouldn't. So Caleb, is there an SEC bias and is it warranted? Yeah.
Yes. Yes, and yes, and yes, and yes, it's warranted. And just to break this down, there have been 27 college football playoff games dating back to 2014 when this thing started. Guess how many of those college football playoff games were won by the SEC, Dave?
How many?
16. The SEC has won 16 of the 27 college football playoff games that have been played. The SEC's record in the college football playoff is 16-5. The only other conference with a winning record in the college football playoff is Clemson at 6-5. I mean, it's the ACC at 6-5, but that's all Clemson. That's all Clemson.
Right.
Every other conference has a losing record. Of course there's SEC bias, but they've earned it. This goes back to the BCS era where the SEC won every single national championship game where they played in the BCS era, except 2013 when Auburn lost in the last second to Florida State with Jameis Winston. So yes, there's an SEC bias. Yes, it's warranted. And by the way, I say it's warranted because the SEC had to earn it because for those who don't know, for years there was an anti-SEC bias. And I'm just going to bring up this fact. from the start of the BCS era in 1998 to now, there's only been one team from a BCS/Power 5 conference to finish the regular season and postseason undefeated and not have a shot at the national championship. That team would be 04 Auburn. So don't come to me about SEC bias that's unwarranted when the SEC maintains right now is still the only major league in college football to have a team finish the season undefeated in the era post-mythical national championships and not have a shot at the national title. They've earned the bias. They have. Sorry. They have.
Yeah. I got you. I'm rolling with you. The SEC deserves a bias. Now, the Big Ten deserves a little bit of a bias too. Okay, so if this was, let's say Michigan lost,
playoff.
What's that?
They've been horrible in the playoff.
Well, but still, I mean, they're Ohio State and Michigan, somewhat Penn State. Although you know how I feel about Penn State. Ohio State, Michigan. If it's between them and a Florida State, I would take them too.
I would.
I mean,
too.
wouldn't you? If Michigan had lost and stumbled over the weekend, wouldn't you take Michigan over Florida State?
I think
or Ohio State over Florida State, whoever you choose.
Based on the committee's criteria, they'd still have to take Florida State because you're supposed to weight conference championships to a certain degree. So if Michigan lost, they wouldn't have the conference title. I don't know if that's the smartest thing to do because then you're not really doing the 4 best teams if you weight conference champions because next year there's only going to be 2 legitimate conferences. And so I don't know why you do that, but yeah.
I would still take an Ohio State or Michigan over a Florida State without their quarterback. I would.
I mean, if we're being honest,
with a loss. So if Michigan had stumbled, I would get Michigan and Ohio State in there to represent the Big Ten over a Florida State because I think the ACC is just absolutely horrible.
Yeah, I agree too. I mean,
a one-loss Big Ten team is more significant than an ACC team that goes undefeated. I'm sorry, Florida State. Now, here's where Caleb, and I love Caleb. For those that don't know, Caleb is one of my favorite people in the world. But he's bat stuff crazy with this next one, and I know where he's going to go. Okay, and I love him like a brother, but I'm a single child, so I don't know how that really works. But I love him like a brother, but there's this. And I'm going to let Caleb go on his little tirade here. But I'm just going to go ahead and tell you he's dead wrong. Here we go.
Tennessee center Cooper Mays here. 3rd down.
Does Florida State have a legitimate gripe given its past? They rejected the SEC in 1992. I'm old enough to remember that. Caleb's not. Also, there have been other scenarios. You pull up the scenario in 2000. So update people why you think that Florida State has no legitimate gripe given its past. Because you tweeted this, and I stayed out of it, but there it was. You're just ripping Florida State for a decision made by a bunch of people that are probably dead now. Because in 1992, they would not join the SEC, and Bobby Bowden even came out and said, why would I go get my brains beat in at that conference? Caleb, so explain to me why Florida State over the past 4 decades undermined their chances to make the 2022-23 college football playoff. Explain this to me, and I love you like a twin brother. But you're absolutely crazy. All right, what do you got?
Florida State. Now, I have no issue with Mike Norvell being upset. Mike Norvell had nothing to do with this decision. And the students there, fine. Although those students did choose to go to Florida State. But anyways, they were 16 when they chose to go to Florida State. They didn't know. Okay. Florida State can't come. If Florida State, right now, I'm just saying this to you guys. Don't come to me about SEC bias. Because you could have had that SEC bias. It was your choice to not join the SEC in 1990, not the SEC's choice. They extended you an invitation, and Bobby Bowden admitted on 3 separate occasions it was a good thing we didn't join the SEC because we wouldn't, we got a much easier road with the ACC. You got 3 national championships for the sole fact that you played in the ACC. Okay, so don't come to me about the SEC bias when you chose not to benefit from the SEC bias. On top of that, the biggest griper, and I called him out on Twitter yesterday, Danny Cannell. You remember Danny Cannell, right, Dave, when he played at Florida State?
Oh, gosh, yes. And if there's a guy that goes overboard just for attention, it's Danny Cannell. Like he'll say stupid stuff just to get attention.
Yes, he will. But he is super upset. He says the games doesn't matter. His exact quote yesterday was, apparently games don't matter. Well, Danny, in 1993, you were on the national championship team at Florida State that lost to Notre Dame and then finished with the same regular season record as Notre Dame. Notre Dame had the head-to-head, but Florida State was given the nod to play Nebraska for the national title, which they won over Notre Dame. So will you give back your national championship ring from 1993, Danny? Do games not matter? What about 2000? When Florida State, now this was 93, that was biased human polls. 2000 was BCS polls. So I don't blame Florida State bias for 2000. That was the BCS, and the formula just got it wrong that year. But Miami beat Florida State. Both teams finished 10-1. Florida State, because of the formula, got into the national title game to play Oklahoma and did not belong in the national title game. That was probably the worst game I ever watched. That's the title game that Josh Heupel won. It was like a 13-2 game. I think you remember that date. It's the ugliest game I think I had ever seen. But
listen, here's Danny Cannell, and it takes me a long time to get here because I think that a lot of people have bias and they don't just outright show it blatantly. Danny Cannell's outright showed it. So to me, anything that you say, Danny Cannell said blank, Caleb, here's my response, is going to be,
They're like, that is total bullshit.
I don't even care what he says, because Danny Cannell does that whole, well, Florida State should have made it. The games don't matter. And he has an argument this time around, but he'll say other stupid stuff about Florida State and the SEC where he's just trying to get attention because he doesn't do his homework. Like, who's the guy that ran out of bounds that's so good? He's so good on TV. Played for the Lions. He ran out of bounds. Oh, help me. He was on their bowl coverage yesterday. Why is his name escaping? Somebody help me on the message board. He is incredible. You know what I'm talking about, right? He ran out of bounds in a game. He's turned out to be, he does his homework. He's incredible. He's the opposite of Danny Cannell. He wasn't a very good player. Probably better than Cannell, actually. But
not sure who you're referring to.
Dan Orlovsky. Dan Orlovsky.
Oh, okay.
Ran
out of bounds for the safety. Yes. I do love Dan Orlovsky.
He does his homework. He knows what he's talking about. Danny Cannell is the type that says, I played, so I have a name. All I have to do is make outrageous statements now and again, and I will just be fine. And it's worked for him for a career. Dan Orlovsky. But Cannell is not that guy. He's the total opposite, and he's welcome to come on this program, and I'll tell him that. He doesn't do his homework. He sits up there and he says outlandish things to get attention, and that's his gig. And I find that to be completely weak journalism. So the Florida State having a legitimate gripe, I love you, Caleb, but those people are dead that made that decision in 92, 93, a lot of people. So I don't think they knew that it was going to be back then. You had really Power 5 conferences, and they were all pretty equal. The ACC was kind of equal to the SEC and the Big Ten. You don't have that now. So I'm going to say
it wasn't equal. That's why they picked the ACC, because they knew it was less. There's consequences for your actions.
It was equal-ish, and those people are dead. So it doesn't matter at this point.
Actions have consequences. If you couldn't foresee the consequences, that's on you.
Okay, if you want to blame the people that didn't work Florida State into the SEC in the 30, 40 years since, that's fine. But you can't blame the people in 1993, because they sure thought that if there was going to be a 4-team playoff and they won the ACC, that they would make it. If they went undefeated, they would make it. No Florida State team was going to get left out back then, because the ACC was respected enough. Not a lot, but enough. And what
Virginia
was the other reason historically?
Oh, just 93 and 2000, undeserving to play for the national title. They have an undeserved national title in 1993 that I think is one of the most tainted national titles ever won in college football. How they got that.
But you had another tweet recently about that Florida State had done something wrong to not make that.
I think that was all I was talking about.
Okay. Well, with all due respect, that was 30 years ago. So I don't think that
dig your grave. This is like when Isaiah Thomas led the freeze out of Michael Jordan in the All-Star game. I don't think Isaiah Thomas thought that meant that Michael Jordan would ice him off the Dream Team in 92. But there's consequences for your act.
That's pretty damn good. All right, I'll let you roll with that. 4th down.
All SEC center Cooper Mays here. 4th down.
Why can't the college football playoff just move up to 12 teams this year? Boy, it'd be sweet if they did. And I hope you're come around to the fact 12-team playoff is going to be incredible. You couldn't do that quickly. That's too much to get moving. That reminds me of there was one year that the NBA said the first round of the playoffs is either going to be 5 or 7 games instead of vice versa. And they did that during the All-Star break. First, it makes you look stupid, like you don't have your ducks in a row. 2, I don't think logistically you could pull all of that off. Maybe you could, but I just think it stokes the fire for the college football playoff 12-teamer next year. So, there's sometimes I read a book before we started this business, Caleb, and I read a book and the first chapter was be patient. And that's hard for me. Like if I ask somebody to do something, I would like for it to be done 5 minutes ago. But if you're starting a business, and that's exactly what college football is, and that's what the college football playoff is, patience. So you have to wait to next year. So as cool as it would be, and I'd be behind it if they just want to throw everything up in the air and make a 12-team playoff this year, Caleb, the bottom line is you got to be patient and you stoke the fire for next year. So why can't they? Logistics and smart business. You've gotten it more exciting for next year. Everybody will say heading into next year, remember what happened to Florida State? Not this year. So that would be why. That would be one of the reasons. But ultimately, I think it's just logistics, right? How could you make that turn so quickly?
It is. And the only reason I asked this question, though, is, Dave, this is how sports works, okay? There's years where there's like 5 legitimate teams, and then there's other times there's like only 2, right? At the end of the regular, there's a clear-cut top 2, where there's, you know what I'm talking about, right? Like in the NFL, there's sometimes a year where a 9-7 team gets into the playoff, and then another year an 11-5 team gets left out. It's just the nature of how the season plays out. It's just really bad luck for college football that the year before the playoff happens to be one of those years where 5 teams have a legitimate gripe to get in, and maybe even like 7 or 8.
I don't think it's bad luck at all. I think it's good luck they've gotten to this point, and it hasn't been an issue yet. Well, I think this was bound to happen with a 14 playoff.
Yeah, I agree. You're right. They've been really. That's actually a good point. I'm just saying it's bad. If it happened in 2017, though, we all would have forgotten it. It happened the year before this is going into effect, though. And I guess that's where I'm at. Because put it this way, the BCS, when it was still 2 teams, the 2009 season, Dave, remember when there were 5 undefeated teams at the end of the year? Florida, Alabama, Texas, Cincinnati, Boise State, and TCU were like the 5 undefeated teams. But in 2013, the year before the college football playoff started, college football got lucky. It was a clear-cut Auburn and Florida State should be playing for the national title. There was nobody else that had a gripe. And so there was no debate. Last year, I thought there were only 2 teams that had a gripe. And now I know Michigan lost the playoff game to TCU, but Michigan and Georgia were the only 2 teams to finish the season undefeated. There should have just been the BCS last year, and those 2 played for the national title. No playoff, honestly. So I just think it's unlucky when you have 5 teams you have to separate from versus 2. But you are right. They're lucky that it hasn't happened before now.
No, see, I don't think it's unlucky. I think 5 would happen and more years than not. I think 5 legitimate arguments would be out there like this year, more years than not. Now, that hasn't been the case, and I thought the college football playoff has been very lucky in that they haven't had a really tough decision to make. But I think 5 would be the regular. I was an 8ist forever because I didn't think the 9th team had a real argument. Listen, if you can't get to 8, too bad. I'm fine being a 12 guy because certainly if you're 13, don't say, hey, I'm Oklahoma. I'm 13. I deserve to get in. No, if you can't make it to 12, then I'm sorry. That's too bad. Again, 4 Downs brought to you by Andy Mason, AndyMasonRealEstate.com. Over 40 years of experience, AndyMasonRealEstate.com. Best prices and the best service when it comes to real estate right there in East Tennessee. So in the end, I'm just curious, Caleb. This is not one of our 4 downs questions brought to you by Andy Mason. But if there were a 5th down,
All SEC center Cooper Mays here. 4th down.
fifth Cooper.
Missouri,
who would have been
Colorado,
your,
1990.
yeah, who would have been your 4th? Your 4 teams.
My 4th. Exactly what the committee's 4 teams were. Exactly what the committee's.
You're right.
But,
and it's not fair.
Yeah.
It's not fair to
fair.
Jordan. It's not fair to the Seminoles. That's life.
Also, but now ask me this. What would be, if you actually were honest and had to go by what the committee is supposed to go by, what would be your 4 teams? Can I tell you mine?
Sure. That's different. That's a different question.
If I had to go by what the committee was told to go by, which they do, you and I both believe body of work matters, not just best team, right? Body of work has to factor into it. Resume.
Yes.
Now the committee's told resume doesn't matter. It's just 4 best teams. If I go by that standard, it's Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama. I mean, who would you pick over those 4? Is there anybody you'd pick over any of those 4 teams in college football on a neutral field right now, Dave, if you had to bet?
No. And I would also factor in eye test a little bit more.
Yeah. So
when I don't see, and Jordan Travis is eye test. Okay. When I don't see him out there for Florida State, that's eye test.
Yeah, but his best game was what they did to LSU, and that was when LSU was putting Harold Perkins at middle linebacker, which was just stupid. So everybody was torching LSU's defense this year.
No, that's fair.